Hello, everyone. A very warm welcome to another session in our regime change webinar series titled Contemporary Case Studies from Iran, Pakistan, and Venezuela. This webinar is organized by the International Movement for a Just World, or JAS. JAS is a Malaysia-based non-governmental organization committed to raising global awareness about injustice within the current international systems while advocating for a more just, humane, and balanced world order. Through its work, JAS promotes critical understanding of global power structures and encourages discussions on justice, dignity, and ethical values in international affairs. So the core theme of today's webinar centers on the concept of regime change and its growing relevance in contemporary global politics. In recent years, increasing attention has been given to how external interventions and geopolitical competition influence domestic political developments, particularly in the global south. While this situation may appear as isolated events, they often reflect broader and recurring patterns of power projection and contestations in international relations. Through these discussions, we aim to deepen our understanding of key issues such as sovereignty, international law, and the complex role of global power dynamics in shaping political outcomes. At the same time, we hope to create a space for informed, critical, and meaningful dialogue among scholars, analysts, and all participants. Before we begin, a quick note to our audience here. Please feel free to use the Q&A feature to submit your questions, and we would like to ask you to keep your question clear, simple, and straightforward. So without further ado, I would like to pass the floor to Prof. Junaid to begin today's webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Khalisha. So it gives me immense pleasure to host this webinar as part of the Regime Change series organized by JUST, the International Movement for a Just World. I'm Junaid Ahmed. I teach religion, law, and global politics, and I direct the Center for the Study of Islam and Decolonization. So today we are meeting at a profoundly consequential moment in global politics, as Khalisha was referring to. In recent weeks, the escalation of the US-Israeli war on Iran has raised urgent questions about sovereignty, international law, and global power. Although a fragile ceasefire has been in place now, it remains uncertain with ongoing tensions and violations. At the same time, diplomacy continues. The recent Islamabad talks, the first high-level direct engagement between Iran and the United States in decades, ended without a breakthrough, although further negotiations are expected, possibly again in Islamabad, despite continued disagreement over key issues. This uneasy mix of ceasefire and confrontation reflects broader historical pattern shaping the global south. It is within this context that today's webinar, Regime Change and the Global South, Contemporary Case Studies from Iran, Pakistan, and Venezuela, is situated. Across these cases, we see recurring themes: external intervention, contested sovereignty, and pressures on states pursuing independent paths, from the political crisis surrounding Imran Khan in Pakistan to military confrontation in Iran to sustained pressure on Venezuela under former President Nicolas Maduro. These dynamics remain deeply interconnected. We are fortunate to have an exceptional lineup of speakers who bring critical insight and grounded regional perspectives to these issues. Today's program will proceed in three segments: Venezuela, Iran, and Pakistan, followed by discussion and audience engagement. At a time when global narratives are often shaped by power rather than principle, forums like this are essential. With that, let us begin. Our first speaker is Zoe Alexandra. Zoe is a journalist and editor of People's Dispatch. She can be found at the wildly popular online media and news outlet, The Breakthrough News. She has many fans in Pakistan. With that, Zoe, I welcome you to speak on Venezuela.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the invitation, and I think this is such an important space. I didn't know I had fans in Pakistan, but we love to cover Pakistan at People's Dispatch, and it's playing, especially to continue to examine the role that Pakistan is playing today in the politics of the global South is crucial. When talking about regime change in Venezuela, I think for a lot of people, this came to the fore on January 3rd. We saw this violent unilateral military attack on Venezuela, the illegal kidnapping of sovereign Venezuelan president Nicolas Maduro, and the first lady, or the first combatant, as they say in Venezuela, Celia Flores. But regime change in Venezuela is a project that has spanned decades. And essentially, ever since the Bolivarian Revolution triumphed and Chavez took office, won the elections in 1998, regime change was a goal of the US government. So I think that when thinking about the events that unfolded on January 3rd, it's important to understand that I think it didn't achieve regime change, but what was carried out was in an attempt to achieve regime change, and that it has been attempted by the US government in a myriad of ways for, again, over 25 years. So I just wanted to maybe characterize the different periods of US attempts at regime change to help us understand kind of the significance of what happened on January 3rd, understanding it not as necessarily an aberration or a major change in US policy, but a continuation of it. Again, uh, since Hugo Chavez won the elections in Venezuela in 1998, the eyes of the US were on Venezuela. Venezuela had been a major source of oil for the United States. It was a place where the US played a very big role in internal politics, where the oligarchy had a very favorable relationship to the United States. Um, the oil refineries in Texas are actually engineered to process Venezuelan oil. This is how close the relationship is. And so when Hugo Chavez in the early 2000s passes the hydrocarbon law, which says that the Venezuelan oil is for the Venezuelan people, the US elites, of course, were scrambling. This law, the hydrocarbon law, and expanded on the previous nationalization of oil, which took place in Venezuela in the 1970s, creating the state oil company. But in the early 2000s was when it was clear that nationalization actually meant benefit for the people and not just kind of these joint ventures with U.S. oil companies and the Venezuelan state oil company. And so when there started to be these threats to U.S. interests in what was, a stable ally of the United States, the U.S. began more openly to start working with partners uh, within Venezuela, right-wing actors who were also very unhappy with the fact that a pro-people government had triumphed and was threatening kind of their bottom line, which is, of course, profit. And so, in this early period, we saw different kind of initiatives that were launched by the Venezuelan oligarchy, backed by the United States, in order to unseat and destabilize the very fresh government of Hugo Chavez. We saw an attempt to revoke his mandate through a signature campaign. This was spearheaded by Maria Corina Machado, who we'll hear about later, who maybe some of you know. There was, of course, the attempted coup, which took place in 2002, which actually the only reason that Hugo Chavez was not unseated in this coup was because the people of Venezuela rallied and fought media censorship to actually demand his return. Um, all sorts of kind of different efforts of the right wing to kind of attempt to undermine Hugo Chavez's mandate, attempts to isolate Venezuela on the international stage. But this kind of back and forth, right wing attempting to win elections, many times being defeated by, the PSUV, the Socialist Party of United Socialist Party of Venezuela. This kind of general politicking goes into a different stage in 2014 under when U.S. President Barack Obama declares that Venezuela is an unusual and extraordinary threat for the United States national security. And this takes place after the death of Hugo Chavez. And as we know, when the United States thinks that its enemy, in quotes, is weak, it attempts to squeeze and take all opportunities to kind of further weaken and further destabilize. So in 2014, when Barack Obama declares that Venezuela is an unusual and extraordinary threat, it essentially paves the way for the United States to impose what is now today over 1,000 sanctions or unilateral coercive measures on Venezuela. And so at first, these are kind of individual sanctions against individuals, but then beginning in 2017, the United States started imposing sectorial sanctions on, for example, Venezuela's oil sector. It also imposed financial sanctions, making it impossible for Venezuela to participate in international financial systems. This means exclusions from essentially doing transactions with all major banks, exclusion from the SWIFT system. This crippled the Venezuelan economy. And this is, of course, a tactic that we know the United States has used against economies of the global South throughout history, with the famous phrase of Henry Kissinger, make the economy scream. This is an attempt to once again create internal disarray, sow discord, and give kind of further energy behind ongoing attempts within Venezuela by the right wing to kind of destabilize. And we saw these in the violent protests in 2014 and 2017 called guarimbas, where right wing protesters um, were on the streets for months, again, once again, trying to destabilize. And of course, these protests were in many ways supported by covertly by the United States. And in 2017, these protests resulted in the deaths of over 100 people, including many Chavistas who were lynched by right-wing protesters. So this period of kind of squeezing Venezuela's economy through sanctions, um, again, caused an over 90% reduction in Venezuela's GDP. Um, it's hard to even imagine what this means from, from again, from 2016 to 2019, this massive reduction in oil production and oil exportation really, really hit Venezuela's economy. In this period is when we see kind of a humanitarian crisis in many ways, where millions of people were forced to migrate from Venezuela, go to other countries, try to have better economic opportunities, because again, the United States is literally squeezing the economy. But this does not cause the regime change that Washington had desired. The Venezuelan people, along with its government and with all of its structures of popular power, were able to resist this attempt to overthrow the government. They resisted creatively, as they say in Cuba. Um, the Venezuelan legislature passed the anti-blockade law. They innovated how they were going to deal with investments. There are, many ways to, creative ways getting around, for example, the sanctions on its ability to trade oil. Iran played a major role in this, we have to say. And so this period of extreme economic pressure by after the pandemic, Venezuela actually saw positive economic growth. So Washington once again realized at once another attempt to kind of strangle the economy of a global South country. And not, of course, it had an impact on Venezuela, but it had not achieved the desired effect, which was for the people to somehow popularly organize and overthrow the government. And so in 2024, Nicolas Maduro was elected president. Um, there was, we don't, there's so many things that you could say about about Venezuelan politics and everything that went into those elections, but we'll just say for the time's sake that Nicolas Maduro was victorious in the 2024 elections. He was sworn in January 2025, and the U.S. realized once again they were unable to impede the will of the Venezuelan people, which was to continue the Bolivarian revolution. And so this task remained unfinished. And when Trump got into office, there started to be clear signs that pressure would increase on Venezuela. On one hand, we saw extremely racist and xenophobic rhetoric being launched at Venezuelan immigrants within the United States, saying that all Venezuelan immigrants were criminals, that they were part of the allegedly kind of mass crime organization Tren de Aragua. lots of kind of racist rhetoric being seen by both Republican and even some Democratic politicians and mainstream media, really focused on Venezuelan immigrants. And for a lot of people in the Venezuela Solidarity Movement, it became very clear that there was going to be some sort of focus on Venezuela. And once Trump got into office and declared, one of the first things he did was declare that this gang that they'd been talking about and building up, Tren de Aragua, was a terrorist organization. And there was the beginning of a concerted effort to say that the Venezuelan government and members of the Venezuelan government were part of a criminal terrorist network. And this, in many ways, set the stage for what we saw on January 3rd, which is the illegal military action against Venezuela and the kidnapping of Nicolas Maduro and Celia Flores. And for over a year, we saw this rhetoric in media by politicians. And in September and beginning in August, really, we saw the deployment of US military assets to the Caribbean Sea in an effort to combat drug trafficking. And there was a military buildup of over 15,000 troops, several warships, many warplanes, a huge amount of military assets, spending billions of dollars a day, carrying out drone strikes on fishermen in the Caribbean, and building this climate of fear every single day, saying, we're going to attack Venezuela, Venezuela's next. And finally, on January 3rd, all of these threats came true. The United States carried out a unilateral illegal military attack on Venezuela, killed over 100 people, and kidnapped the sovereign president Nicolas Maduro and Celia Flores, accusing them of drug trafficking charges. And this, again, the reason I wanted to give this whole preamble is that it's very clear that when seen in this context of a period of 20 years, that what happened on January 3rd was merely the culmination of these attempts to undermine, to villainize, to criminalize, and to stigmatize Venezuela, and to somehow use whatever justification possible to carry out an act of extreme violence and terror against the Venezuelan people and against the Venezuelan government that they elected. And so right now, the struggle continues. The US still has military assets deployed in the Caribbean. It continues to threaten the Venezuelan government. And so we can say that the Bolivarian Revolution continues. Delcy Rodriguez, who is a member of Nicolas Maduro's government, is now president. However, essentially, she is negotiating under gunfire. She's negotiating under siege. And so, very constrained, very limited in what's being able to be done. But the Venezuelan people have vowed to continue to resist. It's very clear that everything that has happened over the past decade is in this attempt of the United States to undermine their project, to undermine their sovereignty. And that gives them the clarity that the way forward is to continue the revolution, to continue emphasizing the values of the Bolivarian Revolution, and to continue insisting that their sovereignty is non-negotiable. So I'll leave it there because there's so much more to say about Venezuela, but I want to respect the time. So that's it.
Zoe, thank you so much. I think you, for someone like me and others, you give hope where otherwise we have been incredibly depressed the way this year started off with the American empire and its the way it was not just directly in the kidnapping in Venezuela, but as you described, the targeting of these boats, the amassing of the American armada for this. I mean, it's just horrible. But thank you for that, Zoe. So our next speaker is Ahmad Ali Jan. Ahmad is the founder and general secretary of the Haqooq-e-Khalq Party and core committee member of the Tehreek-e-Tahaffuz in Pakistan. He has a PhD in history from the University of Cambridge. He's one of the leading public intellectuals and activists inside Pakistan. Most recently, he has offered razor-sharp analyses of the imperial Zionist war on Iran and what it means for the global South. Ahmad is a dear friend. And as a side note, many of us who are critical supporters of former Prime Minister Imran Khan are often called cult followers. It gives me great pride to announce that I'm a cult follower of my dear friend Ahmad. Ahmad, the floor is yours.
Yeah, down with the cults. Thank you, Sinead. Good to meet you. Thank you so much, Zoe, as well. Good to meet you as well after so long. And thank you, Kalisha, and everyone for organizing this very important session. So, the current situation is kind of still oscillating between hope and despair in terms of peace with Iran, and I'm of the opinion, and that seems to be the general um, feeling here in Pakistan, that we might actually see an accord. We might see a ceasefire, long term kind of ceasefire. But long term is a very relative thing. Long term could be 6 months, 1 year, 2 year, but it will not end the actual structural conflict in the Middle East. That's very, very important to remember. The structural conflict arises from the fact that the Middle East was arranged in such a way that an entire people, their existence was erased. The state of Israel is not merely just another state. It appears on the map in conjunction with the erasure of an entire people, the Palestinian people. And very quickly, it becomes a central partner of the US in decimating the republicanist and nationalist wave that swept the Arab world in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. And that had the great advantage for the imperialist world order to not only impose a subjectivity of defeat upon the people of the Arab world, but also imposed high costs of going against the empire, including pushing these countries to spend their surpluses on acquiring weapons, on creating security states, eventually, seeing perpetual instability, even civil war on many occasions. So what we see over the past many decades is that the U.S. Israel combined uh, imposes a form of de-development, underdevelopment in these regions, rather than any kind of a developmental project. And now we also understand the reality of the Gulf states. It's not that they had resources that other countries did not have, or that their geostrategic location was necessarily better, or they had more expertise or capable people. It is the fact that they decided to toe DC's line, toe the Western line, and in exchange they got security from empire. And this was the main difference between the other Arab countries, between Yemen and Saudi, between the UAE and Egypt, and one can go on and on, Iran and Bahrain and all of these countries. The difference is that some countries decided to take the questions of equality, republicanism, dignity, very seriously, and they pursued it through struggles, at times armed struggles, at times revolutionary struggles. On the other hand, you had countries that said we are ready to obey, and they were rewarded. So they became safe havens in a region that was on fire. And one of the things that has happened over the past few years, and particularly since June, is that this myth of a safe region guarded by the US, that myth has been shattered. First in June, when the world was surprised to see, despite Iranian claims that we can hit Israel, the world was surprised and shocked that Iran can actually hit Israel. And the missiles started landing in Israel. And it's the Israeli side that pushed for a ceasefire in June, in the 12-day war. And now this time, already we've heard Comrade Zoe talk about what the U.S. plans were all over the world. It started with Venezuela, then Cuba, the kind of the barbaric sanctions in Cuba, which basically is a crime against humanity, not letting any oil enter a country since November. I mean, only recently some Russian oil entered. But this is a worst kind of collective punishment being given. This is part of a new colonial war announced as such almost by Marco Rubio at the Munich Security Council. That, he celebrated the roots of imperial thinking in the Western world. and the colonial thinking in the Western world. He said what was true but disavowed by mainstream liberal and conservative thinking in the Western world. That the Western countries, Western wealth, Western developmental models, Western democracies are built on the subjugation, decimation, slavery, humiliation, and exploitation of people in the global South. And that kind of entire history was masked under this new regime of human rights and democracy, and helping those who actually are the victims of that colonialism. And it became the new language for pushing the agenda of empire. And we've seen more than 90 regime change operations by the US over the past 80 years. So that was the new liberal language in the post-war world. And I think the only good thing about clowns like Rubio and Trump is that they are unveiling this world. They're unveiling the structural essence, the truth of the world as it is. Because Obama, frankly, was also doing many of the same things. He was the architect of the drone war on Pakistan. He escalated the sanctions regime against Venezuela, as Zoe just explained. Biden was responsible for the genocide in Gaza, totally complicit, as was Kamala Harris. So, one of the things that comes out of all of this, even before the Iran war began, is that this distinction in the West between liberal politicians and conservative politicians, I think that distinction has collapsed. And it's good riddance, in my opinion, because the liberals were able to give this impression of being concerned about issues other than pure power, while pursuing power in the most brutal ways, and yet the language was more sophisticated. And this is not simply a recent phenomenon. Throughout the 19th century, 20th century, even at the peak of colonialism, peak of slavery, peak of naked wars on third world countries, liberalism always preferred the language of human rights and democracy and civilizing missions and development as the mediating terms between ideology and actual policy. So I think that is now gone. With Iran, I think the calculation was quite similar to what they thought would happen in Venezuela. You take out the leader, and then you can negotiate with the rest of the government. Although in Venezuela as well, it's still far more complicated, as we know. It's not that the new government has completely capitulated, and there is a fight back. But in Iran, they started believing their own lies from January, December, and the propaganda of like the last 47 years, that this is an extremely unpopular dictatorial authoritarian government. And this will, if we show the Iranian people that the military might of the US and the Zionist entity is with them, they will come out to overthrow the government. And this is the narrative that was also being pushed by the Pahlavists in the Western world. And I think that was a huge mistake, a miscalculation made by Trump, that he started believing the lies that were being fed to him. And they thought that right after Khamenei is martyred, there will be an uprising. And I tell you, at least in my lifetime, I've never seen any leader being revered and mourned in Pakistan the way Khamenei was. And this is particularly important because Pakistan is primarily a Sunni majority country, and Iran is a Shia majority country. So there's been that sectarian divide and tension historically, but no Pakistani that I met, other than a very tiny alienated, almost disgusting liberal elite, who rejoiced or was not absolutely shaken to the core in grief for Khamenei and for the Iranian people. And you had this entire region rising up in terms of sympathy. If you look at the social media, everybody was on Iran. Everybody was celebrating the way the Iranians were fighting back, the way the Iranians were rallying on the streets, the missiles that were landing in Tel Aviv. I think that significantly improved the mental health of people all over the world, I believe, but also in Pakistan. The fact that these people who did the genocide in Gaza and paid no price, finally they were facing some fear and some terror. That in itself was something that generated a lot of sympathy for Iran. Plus, when they started attacking the military bases across the region, the US military bases across the Gulf. Remember, that is the key security architecture that allows for economic development in the region. And by expanding the war to those security bases, Iran showed that not only did it have the capability to attack them, but also that this entire security architecture no longer guarantees safety. And I think this is a massive moment of decolonization in our region. Why? Because decolonization in actual struggle is violent, right? You colonize not because they have better ideas or they had John Stuart Mill or anything like that. We're colonized because they had strong militaries and they were able to defeat the states in the third world, and they've done it again and again and again over the past 300 years. And they've built this architecture, violent military architecture of counter-revolution, of imperialism that continues to bully countries across the world, and that's what they're doing in Latin America. Iran broke that monopoly. Iran opened the possibility of new alliances, a new security arrangement that will happen in the region. So I think that alone gave a lot of confidence to the people, and they just closed the Strait of Hormuz, and America couldn't do anything but try to block the blocked Strait of Hormuz. And it's interesting that one of the main discussions in Islamabad was about was about opening the Strait of Hormuz, which was already open before the war. So they've changed the terms of the debate. They've changed the terms of what's possible and what's not possible, and this will have long-term consequences. I'll just conclude by saying, a new regional consciousness has emerged in all of this. We have governments whose leadership is extremely pro-US, but even then, the kind of security imposition, the imposition of the security dilemmas faced by states like Pakistan over the years has pushed them towards China. So 82% of our military equipment now comes from China. And recently we've established improved relations with Iran to the extent that the first visit made by the Iranian president after the 12-day war with Israel was Pakistan. Pezeshkian came to Lahore and then Islamabad. And now the army chief has gone to Tehran. So a new kind of a situation is emerging where we're not speaking via the Western capitals. We're actually speaking to countries directly, to Riyadh, to Tehran, to Beijing, to Islamabad. This is a world historical change, which needs to be welcomed. However, our elites remain colonized, partly because of their ideological training and partly because of their vested interests. Their properties are all in Western capitals, in Western banks. That's where their money is. And because of that, they're dependent on the IMF. They're dependent on the World Bank. The economic model does not allow for sovereign development. So now you have a split, a real contradiction emerging. The objective movement of history is pushing us towards the East. It's pushing us towards our region. It's pushing us towards sovereign development, towards regional security, regional economic development. But then you have these elites whose interests are tied to the West. And this split will keep creating tension at the heart of the Pakistani nation. And the recent increase in petrol prices kind of was an indication of where things will go. Khamenei was the first one to give sacrifice in a moment of crisis, and our leadership to repay all the loans that we've taken over the years, which have only come to the elites, because ordinary people, 40% of them are living below poverty line. To repay those loans, they added an extra tax on gas in Pakistan, on petrol. So it's kind of like extracting wealth from the working class to perpetuate the luxurious lifestyles of this tiny alienated elite. This is the economic model that is being imposed. We see this in the Kachi Abadis, the slums in Islamabad that are being demolished as we speak, because speculators are looking to make high-rise buildings. They think a lot of money is about to come from the US, and that's where the money will go in real estate, stock market, and these banks. They will make the money, whereas ordinary people will be left behind. So right now, the question of finishing the task that history has given us, that requires a very strong working class based movement that is committed to the region, committed to the country, and it requires an economic agenda which is not parasitical, that is not based on a rentier economy, rent seeking, and instead is pro people, pro development, and pro sovereignty. And I think the separating line between our elites and where history needs to take us is a separation between imperialism and anti-imperialism and capitalism and socialism, and that's the fight we need to push for. Thank you.
Amar, thank you very much. This is obviously a quite tense debate going on right now. As we were discussing earlier, the role that Pakistan is now acquiring as this mediator between the US and Iran, and particularly someone like the Field Marshal General Asim Munir as this chief diplomat, that there is a genuine debate taking place within Pakistan about the benefits of this and maybe some of the costs of this as well. But thank you, Amar. We'll continue that discussion. Our final speaker is Mr. Heather Mehdi Saab. It's wonderful to have him, and finally we get to meet. He's a cutting-edge analyst on global, Middle Eastern, and Pakistani current affairs and history. He was an officer in the Pakistani military. He's one of the leading voices for democracy in Pakistan and is an intellectual powerhouse and activist in the Pakistani diaspora. It gives me great pleasure to now welcome him to speak on Pakistan. Heather Mehdi Saab.
Thank you very much, Junaid. Thank you, Khalisha. Thank you, Hassan. Great to hear you, Zoe. Also, Amar. First time we're connecting on a forum. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, and greetings to everyone. I hope I can make it brief because I can go on and rant for a long time, but I think I have like 10 minutes. I'm trying to make it brief. So I think there are three elements to my perspective about regime change in Pakistan. And the first fundamental is that what we're seeing in Pakistan and in the world is power devoid of both morality and legitimacy. So what we're seeing the US do at the world stage, and what we're seeing the Pakistan army and Asim Munir, I will never call him a field marshal because he's unconstitutional and illegal. He's not even a general. He's a usurper who has committed treachery against the state of Pakistan. And eventually his lot is going to be Article 6 under the Constitution of Pakistan. I hope he gets capital punishment and we see the end of military hegemony in Pakistan and fascism and authoritarianism. What he and the military institution is doing in Pakistan is exactly a manifestation of power devoid of morality and legitimacy. The second big pillar is that Pakistan is really an extension of the post-colonial Second World War imperial order, which Omar is so passionately advocating for, the post-colonial, post-imperial order. We're literally a testimony that this post-colonial and imperial order still exists. I think the third piece is what is different about regime change in Pakistan versus the other pieces, and that's the looking at the nature of the institution of the Pakistan Army, and perhaps a conversation for another day is the nature of the society that comprises the geography of Pakistan, and whether decolonization, as Ahmad said earlier, is a is a worker-driven movement or will follow a very harsh reality where one will see much more than just a movement, but we will see violence when we are able to then uproot both the physical structure of the Pakistan Army as an institution which dominates Pakistani politics, and then leading to a saner world. So uh, I, I will try and keep it brief within these three structures, but what we're seeing is that what we saw in Iran and Venezuela, in Chile and Pakistan since the late 50s today, is that the template is very real and its recurrence is well documented. Everyone knows about it. Always, there's been an internal character that facilitates change for the US predominantly, and in Pakistan's case, the Pakistan Army. So we've the Pakistan Army has facilitated the US, post Second World War, communism, fight against the Yellow Devil in the north, and then there was the USSR, Afghanistan again, Ziaul Haq comes in, then there's the war on terror, and General Musharraf comes in. These are all dictators, and then there's the desire for global hegemony by the US, and then there's this battle against China, and Pakistan is seen as an economic juggernaut of the economic vehicle for the Chinese juggernaut. And then there's the Middle East hegemony, and then there's Israel. And like Omar so explicitly said, that the whole security architecture of the Middle East is now destroyed. In Pakistan, what happened in April 2022 and earlier, the template is slightly different. And what happened in Pakistan is that it was not an externally imposed regime change as we classically understand. It really is that the external pressure activated a pre-existing internal architecture. And that's why I said we're an extension of the post-colonial world order after the Second World War, because the existing architecture existed. And that distinction is really essential for us to understand, because it's both the diagnosis and the prognosis. So here is what happens. So I'll have to go back a little bit to 1947, but perhaps maybe 1857, in which there was the last battle, so to speak, between what was the local governance structure, or the last vestiges of the Mughal Empire and Bahadur Shah Zafar, and the British trying to colonize British India, which they did, by the way. And post 1857 was a colonial administrative structure that they established in terms of the governance structure, the civil services, the judicial courts, the police, the criminal courts, the civil court, but most critically, the military institution that they established. And that's really important for us to understand, that this military institution that they established was whose culture was purely built around a total loyalty and chain of command to the institution and to the person who commanded that institution. Didn't have any constitutional to owing allegiance to any constitutional authority or to a democratic mandate. And that is foundational, because this institution has behaved exactly in the same manner that it has behaved since 1857. Now, that may sound really strange to you, but the laws in Pakistan existing today, the vast majority of them date back to the British colonial time, even to the late 19th century. Our penal codes, our criminal codes, the Government of India Act, which is the constitutional architecture of the Constitution of Pakistan, is 1935. The Official Secret Act goes to 1917. It is an incredibly funny and sad phenomena of how the current state of Pakistan is governed by exactly the same colonial administrative architecture and the military architecture that was established by the British. So that's very important. So it was a natural consequence that whenever an external actor wanted to bring about some influence in Pakistan, it actually picked up on the most powerful administrative unit, which was the Pakistan Army. And we go back to 1951 when Ayub Khan becomes Pakistan's first commander-in-chief. This man was actually passed over for promotion by someone we would revere as the founder of the country called Quaid-e-Azam, because he was considered very ambitious and he was considered incompetent. And by the way, this person had been fired for cowardice in the Second World War. So he happens, through some strange set of circumstances, which we'll not go into today, becomes the commander-in-chief of the Pakistan Army in February of 1951, because the British commander-in-chief before him tells the then Prime Minister Liaquat Ali that if you appoint this person, he will make sure that the military does not move against you again, because earlier in 1950, Liaquat Ali Khan, the first Prime Minister of Pakistan, had suffered, had been, there was a military attempt to overthrow him called the Rawalpindi conspiracy by the Chief of the General Staff. And so he said, oh, okay, so I will be safe with this guy, even though he's incompetent and inefficient. And he knew that this guy had been passed over. So he becomes the prime minister. Now, what I want to say is, why was this person picked up? Because he was picked up through all the circumstantial evidence that we now know, was picked up by the Britishers post-independence of Pakistan in 1947 and the Americans as our man. And this person eventually, in 1954, he was a sitting commander-in-chief in uniform, becomes a member of the cabinet for 4 years, from 1954 to 1958, and is a member of a civilian cabinet as a uniformed commander-in-chief of the army. So the proverbial military camel had actually entered the civilian tent of the so-called Democratic Republic of Pakistan. I'm going to fast forward so that we don't. I just wanted to look at my time. So I'm already in 10 minutes. Let me go back to what happens in Pakistan. So in April 2022, the world has changed. There is this prime minister who has not come up the traditional elite way that Amar talked about. You know, these guys are the elite at the top of the Pakistani social structure who owe allegiance only to themselves or to the people outside. This man has struggled 30, 40 years in the wilderness, come up. You may have people have a lot of objections about, you know, him not being someone who assesses people well, etc. But he was a nationalist. He broke the mold of allegiance to the external player, which is the US. He wanted a very strong, unified Muslim bloc economically. He was independent in the way he looked at foreign policy. He was very independent in the way he looked at Israel's hegemony and the rights of the Palestinians. He was very independent in the way he looked at Kashmir, which is a festering problem between Pakistan. So this colonial institution called the Pakistan Army, which owes allegiance to nobody else, not to the state, not to the constitution, not to the laws of the country, not to any civil government, only to itself, became stronger and stronger when it took over in 1958 and to now. So literally from 1951 onwards, when Ayub Khan became the commander-in-chief of the Pakistan Army, till 2026, there have been 4 formal takeovers, and the rest of the military chiefs in between, barring an odd exception, literally called the shots behind whenever there was even a civilian government. In Imran's case, he and I say he was naive enough to think in his mind, because I know him personally, and we've had long conversations on this subject. I was actually one of the people who told him not to give an extension to the previous army chief, Qamar Bajwa, because it would give rise to what has happened today. It's one of the reasons. But anyway, he was naive enough to think that this institution owes loyalty and allegiance to the country, to the laws, to the constitution. They don't. They're completely embedded, vested, infected with that post-colonial thing. So I was in the army myself on the 5th of July, 1977, when General Ziaul Haq, and I'm going to end with this last, when General Ziaul Haq imposed martial law and overthrew a civilian elected government, which is Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's, even though I did not align to him because he pretended to be a socialist, was actually a complete fascist. But even a person like me who subsequently left the army several years ago, several years after, saying that martial law is not what the army is the way to govern Pakistan, even I accepted that without even blinking an eye. Completely lock, stock, and barrel, did not think it was wrong, did not think it was incorrect, did not think it was unconstitutional, illegal. This is 1977. This is Heather Mehdi, an extremely evolved political mind. I've started from the left. I was a card-carrying communist in my student days. So look at the state of the institution of the Pakistan military. So the way forward, last comment, the way forward for Pakistan is the only way to break this myth of invincibility that the military exercises over every aspect of Pakistan, because Pakistan is becoming a police state, is that the people at the top have to suffer the most harsh punishments that we can bring. Now, some people may object to what I'm saying because, some people don't like capital punishment. I'm a great believer in capital punishment for Pakistan. I believe unless and until the senior military leadership of Pakistan and anyone amongst the governance structures who have collaborated with the current senior leadership of Pakistan in violating the constitution, in violating the laws of Pakistan, in committing treason against, in collaborating with who we consider our enemies against the interest of Pakistan, until and unless they are not given capital punishment, no soldier of the Pakistan Army, no officer of the Pakistan Army, no police officer of the Pakistan Army, no civil servant of the company's administrative infrastructure will stop doing what they're doing now. And that is really the bottom line to start the workers' movement or to change the structure of Pakistan. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Heather Mehdi. I don't think anyone can say after hearing you that this is a boring webinar or boring discussion. And there's so much there, and I think that raises what I was saying earlier, the interesting debate that's now taking place in light of this prominent role that Pakistan is playing. So thank you, all three of you, but I'm especially glad that we did have Zoe and that Venezuela was not left in this entire discussion as, in some ways, representative of the entire Western Hemisphere and the American Empire in Latin America. So let me just begin with my own question, actually a question from the audience as well to Zoe. I'm glad that you gave that history so that people just don't think that this is a new policy that emerged under Trump. So one of the questions is I think also you pointed to this in your presentation, is why under the great liberal Emperor Barack Obama was Venezuela designated as a national security threat? And just a second question would be, at this particular point, I think, and even Amar alluded to it, there is a, again, very interesting and tense debate about where the current Venezuelan government stands. I think that people are often unfair towards it, but I defer to you and kind of your analysis. So one is the why under Obama was it designated as a security national, and where do you see it right now? Please.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think on one hand, there The US loves to say that countries that it doesn't like are major violators of human rights, and because of this, for some reason, they threaten the integrity of the United States. The Obama declaration in first 2014 and then 2015 again took place at this moment where there were these protests in Venezuela, as I said, in 2014. And then we saw a similar thing repeated in 2017 when there were these very violent protests that took place that were supported by politicians, very far-right politicians like Leopoldo Lopez. Um, Again, where Chavistas were being lynched, where security forces were being attacked. And so there was a very tense kind of narrative battle at that point. And the US, again, these are patterns we can see everywhere, and this happened with Cuba as well. Um, when it comes to, sorry about my water bottle, when it comes to countries that it doesn't like, protests and repression actually matter. So, it's interesting. You won't see the US call Kuwait a threat to US national security because they've just detained a journalist for posting a video on his social media page. They won't say that, Saudi Arabia is a threat to US national security. You're only a threat to the U.S. national security if your policies are against the United States. But Obama had the excuse of the 2014 protests and kind of the fallout from that. And I mean, essentially, the justification was, quote, like human rights abuses. And what's interesting is that that actually has no impact on U.S. national security. Um, but then this has been sustained again through kind of a variety of means. And I think now the reason that they had used previously why Venezuela is a threat to the US national security was again because of this kind of like drug trafficking accusation um, and saying that Venezuela, at one point they said Venezuela was responsible for trafficking fentanyl into the United States, and they actually had to go back on that claim because it was unsubstantiated, even by their own documents from the DEA. It was unsubstantiated. If you look at the 2025 Drug Enforcement Agency report released by the United States government, there are two paragraphs that mention Venezuela. And they only talk about the existence of Tren de Aragua as a network that exists across Latin America of kind of people involved in crime, but it is not Venezuela in all of the maps of drug trafficking to the United States. Venezuela is actually not a major route because A, it's not a major producer, and B, it is not along the primary drug trafficking route, which is the Pacific route that goes from Ecuador and Colombia into Central America, into Mexico, and then up to the United States. So that's kind of one thing. And then with regards to the current Venezuelan government, I think it's, of course, well, not of course, but a lot of us are Marxists, so we believe in the dialectics and kind of nothing stays the same. And this current government is having to face completely new circumstances. It's having to face once again the reality that its country was just illegally invaded by the United States. 100 people were killed, civilian apartment buildings were bombed, the president was kidnapped. And so this is the context within which the current Venezuelan government is operating. Um, it is also one where many members of the government have indictments against them, have warrants against them. Vladimir Padrino Lopez, who used to be the defense minister, has like an active warrant. Nicolas Maduro's son, who lives in Venezuela, has an active warrant against him. So and then, again, there's still military assets deployed in the Caribbean surrounding Venezuela, threatening it, essentially gunboat diplomacy. And so these are the constraints in the current Venezuelan government. So I think that essentially every time someone sees them take a certain position or make a certain decision, there's this kind of knee-jerk reaction to say, oh, look, they're caving to the Americans. And I think on one hand, it's important to understand the context within which it's operating, but also that the Bolivarian Revolution is not just the leaders of the Venezuelan government. The Bolivarian Revolution is the communal councils. It is the popular movements that have pushed the revolution at every moment, and that those actors continue to play a very active part, and they will have to continue to push the most revolutionary line in this context because the government does not have the ability to take the revolutionary positions that it once did. It is the movements, it is the people, it is the Venezuelan people with their high levels of anti-imperialist consciousness that are going to sustain this push for revolution. Under Maduro, there was this big push for building the commune. This is golpe timón, this phrase that Chavez said in 2013, which is the turn at the helm, which is to return to build the communal structures, to build communal power, because ultimately, it's a socialist revolution, so it does believe in transforming structures of power, decentralizing this, building people's power, and that is a process that continues to be underway despite U.S. threats. And so I think in these moments, the most important thing is to turn our eyes to the Venezuelan people and the projects that they're continuing to build and understand that there are deep contradictions. And we struggle with those contradictions, and that is class struggle. Class struggle advances with contradictions, and it advances in a reality where the U.S. is still the biggest, has the largest military in the world. It spends over $1 trillion a year on its military, and it has 800 over 900, sorry, military bases across the world. And so revolutions advance, they have setbacks, they have tactical retreats, but the people are continuing to push forward. So I think that we have to understand this context and continue to highlight the efforts of the Venezuelan people.
Thanks so much, Zoe. I know that you have to go, but this was so important because many of us, and we're amongst comrades here, have taken such great inspiration from the developments in Latin America in the 21st century. So there has been quite a lot of depression, I would just put it mildly, over the past few years, thinking that this Bolivarian revolution, the Chavismoism, all of this has collapsed. So just before you go, specifically Venezuela, and you're hinting to that, but as the entire the region, although this is every country has its own dynamics, but Latin America under whether it's a new Monroe Doctrine or it's the old Monroe Doctrine, where do you see, where is your honest assessment, us amongst comrades, about where that is? Because there has been a great deal of depression from comrades throughout the world who look to Latin America in this century.
There have been a lot of setbacks. That is undeniable. Argentina is in a major setback. Ecuador is in a major setback. But in all of these setbacks, there has been kind of like a reassessment of priorities, reassessments of the horizon for the project of, as they say, the Patria Grande, the great homeland of Latin America and the Caribbean. Cuba continues to be an inspiration for all, not only just as like a historic idea, but a living example. And we saw just 2 days ago, Miguel Diaz-Canel, the president of Cuba, preside over a ceremony remembering the 65 years since the Bay of Pigs invasion, an invasion coordinated and orchestrated by the United States government, where Fidel himself joined Cuban revolutionaries to defeat U.S. imperialism. Miguel Diaz-Canel declared to that gathering that Cuba will not give up. Fidel is Playa Girón. He continues to symbolize that, and the Cuban people continue to take that torch forward. And I think they have declared that they will fight U.S. imperialism to death. They've already shown that 32 Cubans were killed during the U.S. attack on Venezuela. They have shown what it means to defend the revolution once again. And despite, the major challenges facing a lot of countries, again, with this Monroe Doctrine, there are still beacons of hope like Cuba there are still this solidarity that's growing across the continent, and I think awakening up, because people are seeing that it doesn't help to be a friend of the United States. You're always going to be in a inferior position, in a weakened position, and that when criminals like Daniel Noboa take office in Ecuador, when the succession of neoliberals have taken office in Ecuador, there's been an increase in murder, there's been an increase in insecurity. Ecuador used to be the safest country in Latin America. It is currently the most unsafe, highest level of homicides. And so people are understanding that, okay, maybe we were told that the left wing is corrupt, maybe we were told all these lies, but actually, this is not the reality. And so I think people are waking up to the reality of what the US wants for the region, and they don't accept that. So it is a moment of setback, but I think it's also a moment of hope, because people know now really what it means, what the US plan for the region is, and they know they don't want any part of that.
Zoe, thank you so much. I mean, your perspective and analysis was so important here, because sometimes we get some new development, some war breaks out against Iran, and this gets lost. But thank you so much for both a sober assessment of where we're at in Latin America, but also giving us hope that the revolution continues, and we have to find ways to move it forward. Zoe, I know you have to run, but thank you so much on behalf of Just, and I know that we will continue to have these engagements with you. Thank you, Zoe. Take care. Bye bye. And I know that both Amar and Heather Medisab have to go as well, but they've made my life easier, since both of them kind of touching on Pakistan, and of course in the context of what's going on in Iran. So in fact, I'll put it to both of them, and I think that they probably have some elements of the discussion that's already been had that they want to maybe touch upon. But I will put it to both of them. One, what is the role of Zionism at this point? How do we see Zionism at this point, particularly in relationship both to the American empire as well as to all of these countries in the Gulf, in West Asia, in the Muslim world that we have traditionally seen as being allies of Zionism? So where's that movement going? And the second thing, which is the interesting debate amongst Pakistani comrades, is that one will maybe put it to both of you, that where it seems like there's a lot of agreement on the historical analysis, and especially the role of the Pakistani army. It seems that maybe both of you are speaking about pie in the sky at the present moment. Amar, in the sense that while those material conditions in terms of the alliance of the ruling elite may move from west to east, even though that's probably not happened, that doesn't necessarily guarantee that internally in Pakistan, so the social majorities, social movements, workers, etc., will come any close to social justice. So that I'll put it to Amar like that. And Heather Medisa, yeah.
Can I just address this, because I have to rush for a hard stop meeting? This
Sure, I
last
was going to
question.
say the same thing to you. It's
Okay.
for people who put to
Okay.
you, it's pie in the sky. That what
Yeah, no,
you're
it isn't.
advocating the cap. So please, please.
It actually isn't.
Yeah.
People don't realize that a very significant shift has taken place in Pakistan, and there are four factors. Number one, the Pakistan army was revered. We had a romance. The country had a romance with the Pakistan army, considered it brilliant, great, patriotic. The universal sentiment in Pakistan is absolute hatred for the Pakistan army. The vast majority is in a sea change from what existed from 1947, literally right up to April 2022, when this was an extremely loved, beloved institution, could dramatically change despite poor military intervention that happened earlier. That's number one. The second thing is that the army chief, irrespective who the person was a respected person in the army, feared not as much, but respected. In today's age, Asim Munir is not respected at all by the rank and file, and I speak from inside information, but feared tremendously, because even the families of generals and their wives and their daughters and their children are under constant monitoring, and I can say that from first hand. That's the second thing. The third thing is that the Pakistani society was very docile, very colonial, slave-minded, for the first time manifested a behavior that we've never seen in the past, which is from being selfish, very individualistic to collective, from being very today benefit to future. And we saw that once Imran was removed and there were the by-elections in the Punjab, where 30 of the 35 seats or thereabouts were won by Imran Khan's party, voted for people who knew that these people will not go into parliament because once they get elected, they would then resign again. So there was this manifestation of saying, I am voting for the person I think stands for an ideology, a vision. So that was the first manifestation. The second really was the elections in February 2024, which by all counts, Imran Khan had won, and by some counts had a two-third majority. What did it tell you? That despite all the challenges that had been put in front of him and his party and taking away this election symbol and making it very difficult for the party for someone to vote for the party in a highly illiterate environment where people get confused about election symbols and where to stamp, what does it tell you? It tells you that the thinking of the people in Pakistan has changed. They hate the army. They don't respect the army chief. They hate the army chief. People are looking towards collective well-being. The only thing that's holding people back from a revolution, and I call it a revolution, and I call it a violent revolution, is fear, fear of proportions that you can't imagine. Uh, I think they will get there eventually. What the trigger event is, I don't know. Whether it's economic, is the economy, is poverty, is a complete sense of hopelessness. Don't know. Very difficult. I interviewed Noam Chomsky and I said, how does one predict? He said, if you can predict it, you'd be a billionaire. No one knows what the trigger event is. So we don't know what the trigger event is. But I'm telling you, the trajectory, it's not a pie in the sky. I can see it right in front of me. I can see the demolition of the existing structure in Pakistan. I cannot see what will happen after that. And with that, if you excuse me,
And then
I
Mehdi
have to
Saab,
go.
thank you so much. And we look forward to future engagements with you as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Well, pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye. Amar, so you have the last word. Lucky you. And so there's two separate issues here. One is what I was referring to in terms of the way we want to analyze both the stage of empire. So many of us obviously have been saying that we are at a moment of imperial decline. It's obviously going through its final stages and phases. And so, but in relation to that, the question of Zionism, um, are we seeing the American empire dissociating itself somewhat from Zionism? Of course, many people are actually even pointing to the fact that Trump is continuing to engage in these peace talks, as in some ways refusing the traditional influence that Israel and Netanyahu has over him. So, and in relation to that, also the Muslim countries and the Gulf countries and their relation to Zionism. One, and the second that issue that obviously we're discussing with Heather Medisab, and as I said before, uh, I think that like I said, the diagnosis of the history of Pakistan and the role that the Pakistani army has played, many of us agree with that. And in fact, probably many of us also agree with what Heather Medisab was saying when he spoke about the quite precipitous decline in the popularity of the Pakistan army, particularly, and what we're really speaking about is in the Punjab. It's never been that popular in the regions of the Pashtuns or the Baloch. So while that may be accurate, I think it is accurate. The question once again comes, as we pose it to Heather Medisa, but to you as well. What does that necessarily guarantee that internally we will see a challenge to the traditional hierarchic order that exists within Pakistan? So that I think is the central question, because Heather Mehdi Sabs may say that someone like General Asim Munir is not very popular. He's feared and hated. What's going on the one hand, and I know that you are the voice to actually ask about these issues. What's going on the one hand, where Pakistan is playing this very positive role in mediating this conflict, hopefully putting it to an end. At the same time, it seems like so much legitimacy is being given, definitely internationally, and there to the military elite, to the political elite, that it becomes more difficult for actors internally to challenge that. So I know these are two big issues, but who better to ask than you?
Well, thank you. I'll stick to Pakistan. I mean, the U.S., the situation in the U.S. With Zionism, I'll just briefly just say, it's there's one of the interesting developments is that young people seem to be very anti-Israel in the U.S. right now. The right, there's a whole group of right-wing commentators, including Tucker Carlson and others, who are very critical of Israel. That's a positive development, and there's always been some policy difference between Tel Aviv and Washington D.C. I wouldn't call it a rupture at this stage at all, because the amount of money and arms flowing to Israel is tremendous, and unless Israel becomes a liability for the U.S., which would mean that it cannot discipline Arab governments and cannot discipline resistance movements over there, then there might be some talk of finding something else. But I think at this point, the last year or 2-3 years, we've seen that the US and Israel are very much, in terms of their worldview, their vision, they're very much the same. And what Mike Huckabee said about supporting the possibility of Israel taking over basically the entire Middle East, this is reflective of at least a point of view in the Trump administration, and a pretty influential point of view, to the point that this person was made the representative of the US in Israel. Okay, on Pakistan, I mean, you see, one of the things that in any case, the way how I analyze things is that there's certain desires that actors have, whether they're in the opposition or running the state, and then there are objective conditions. And no master narrative, no grand narrative can ever fully capture the contradictions of an actual historical formation, right? There are always things that escape a certain narrative. And let me give you an example. We're on the same page, as you said, on the history of the Pakistani military, right? The 40s, 50s, 60s, Pakistan signed the Seato-Cento Pacts and was very much firmly in the Western Hemisphere in the fight against the Soviet Union. But then you had other things that were happening at the same time that kind of disrupt this entire narrative. For example, Pakistan supported the Bandung Conference, was one of the hosts of the Bandung Conference. Pakistan supported Ben Bella in Algeria when he couldn't travel. Pakistan gave an official diplomatic passport. That's one thing Algerians remember. Then we became very close to China at the peak of its revolutionary might. This is the 1960s. Mao Zedong was very fond of Pakistan. Chu Enlai was very fond of Pakistan. Now, why were we doing that? We were doing that because of the India threat. India was a very serious security concern, and India and China went to war in '62, and that opened up possibilities of friendship, pragmatic friendship between China and Pakistan. China also saw Pakistan as a good friend to have, considering the hostilities both with the Soviet Union and India. Then after India's nuclear bomb in '74, we pursued a bomb, and it's highly likely that Zulfikar Bhutto's government was overthrown because of that in 1977. But even the governments that came afterwards, General Zia, Benazir, Nawaz Sharif, even Musharraf, they remained committed to the bomb. And then, you have the war on terror, where Pakistan was in the American camp, but it was also supporting the Taliban. It was disrupting logistics of NATO. Osama bin Laden was found hanging out in Abbottabad. So it's basically, reality then becomes a bit more messy. And we were the linchpin of the BRI initially. We were CPEC, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, And it was started by largely a pro-US government. It was Nawaz Sharif's government who started it. Then you had the gas pipeline, Iranian gas pipeline in 2011, 2012, which was a Zardari government. So the thing is that there's certain kind of imperatives that history impose upon political actors. It's beyond their will, beyond their subjective condition to totally reject that. Many would not have wanted good relations with Iran or historically good relations even with China. All of those things could be subjective, but objectively, we're being pushed in this direction. And when you're in the thick of everyday diplomacy, these things kind of have an impact on pushing you in a particular direction. Now, does that mean that Pakistan is about to become a part of the axis of resistance? Of course not. Pakistan has become an important actor in terms of mediating different actors in the region. There's certain positives that have come out, which includes the fact that we have a strong security umbrella. And I think the Pakistan-India war has really enhanced Pakistan's support in the region as a potential security guarantor in the coming years. That will not necessarily translate into good domestic politics at all. In fact, as I've already stated, there's an all-out attack on the poor in Pakistan at the moment. There's a new accumulation regime which is displacing slum dwellers, farmers. The price of education is shooting up. We both are in academia. We see how Pakistani students struggle to pay their tuition, and it's going to become harder. It's already becoming harder and harder. So the mafias in all of these sectors will make a lot of money, and that is where the struggle has to be. So I'll just say certain strategies, speaking strictly from an opposition perspective, certain strategies have been foreclosed, which means lobbying the West. That's over. Pakistanis can no longer do it. I was always opposed to it. But there were others who thought, no, we are facing a belligerent institution, and maybe it's a good idea to go to the Congress or go to the British Parliament. I just think that thing is over, and in a way, that's good for us, because it sucked up a lot of our energies in the opposition to be, trying to speak to basically parliaments that are pro-genocide. There's no point in even if they were to support the opposition, it'll come at a cost that'll be too high for our people. So that is foreclosed. The other thing that's foreclosed, in my opinion, is that we can no longer say we would, destroy the institutions in Pakistan. We need a security umbrella, and there is this potential within the security apparatus and the state to play a different kind of role. Our task has to be to transform the state, to transform these institutions. We cannot start from zero. We have to take history where it is. It's like, Althusser used to say, it's like jumping onto a moving train. So you enter time within a historical moment, and we have to be humble about the fact that even a revolution would not mean kind of destroying the train and destroying the railway line and then rebuilding something. The revolution would be to change the direction of that train. And that would be a fantastic achievement if one can do that within their lifetimes. That's a massive, massive achievement. You can't rebuild everything, but you can change the direction. And that's the struggle. An objective opening is there to be taken. And yet I have full faith in the ruling classes to betray that opening. And it is up to people, grassroots activists, to actually affirm what history is offering us, which is a sovereign development path linked to the region. And that would require, of course, limiting every institution within the domain that they're supposed to operate in. That means pushing the military out of the political and the economic affairs and allowing for democratic freedom so that the will of the people can be represented. And in an immediate sense, that means releasing former Prime Minister Imran Khan, PTI members, Dr. Marang Baloch, Ali Wazir, all of them. That will set the foundation for starting this new journey that Pakistan can and, in my opinion, should embark upon.
Mar, thank you very much. Just before you go, the just two things. One is I'm so glad you emphasize the how what a flawed approach it is, this lobbying the West to get involved. And I think that what happened, particularly right before Trump was elected, was the idea. I mean, much of it good faith idea of many Pakistanis abroad in the United States that they could somehow lobby them, the Trump administration, or the coming to hopefully free Imran Khan, this type of thing. Now, at the time, I both thought this is unethical, precisely what you say. I mean, what about the genocide in Gaza? What about these other issues? Great, freeing Imran Khan, but there's some other issues that we want them to take positions on as well. But what turned out to also not be successful, right? I mean, now Trump comes in, he could care less about Imran Khan. So this was a great lesson in exactly that. Not only is it unethical, it doesn't work. So that's so I'm so glad you highlighted that. And the second thing is, I'll just say this in ending that I'm so glad that you bring the general critique and analysis to what needs to happen in concrete ground realities, because again, a revolution, etc., does not happen in a vacuum. It has to address the specific conditions and the stage of mobilization in the country as well. And that's the perspective that you bring. You take it away from the pie in the sky to the local grassroots mobilization. So, Ma, I know you have to run, but thank
Thank
you
you so
so
much.
much for joining us.
Thank
I think
you.
some of these last questions I'll take myself, but I know you have
Okay.
to run. Mamar, thank you so much, and we can
Thank you,
hope to
brother.
continue our engagement with you as just.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Amar. Take
Absolutely.
care.
Thank you. Thank you, Khalisha. Thank you, Hasanal. Thank you.
Thanks. Take care. Khalisha, if I and Hassan, just one or two questions, which I think, do we still have time for? Um, how much time do we have? I'm wondering. Do
We still
we?
have time, so it's okay if you would
Okay.
like to.
Sure, sure. I mean, these are obviously questions that I think about a lot as well. So there are about 1 second. So, okay. Right. Well, I mean, I think so. One of the questions is about what I think we've spoken about, and that is how does this current diplomatic popularity of the regime in Pakistan enhance the legitimacy of that regime? And I've said before that yeah, it's enhancing it internationally, but not domestically. And the problem becomes when those domestic voices of opposition and get swallowed and in the kind of chorus of praise of someone like the Field Marshal General Asim Munir or the Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif. So I think that, as I think both Amar and Heather Mehdi were emphasizing, these struggles happen concomitantly, like both the domestic internal struggle against the regime, and of course, calling out the regime for, in some ways, being a fake anti-imperialist actor or a fake anti-Zionist actor, that in the moment it may seem like they are positioning themselves as these good faith actors against empire. If you actually analyze it more specifically and concretely, one may realize that actually they're not such good faith actors, and that the struggle against these regimes need to continue. There's a question on Iran and whether it can truly be considered an anti-imperialist, considering it has also basically attacked some of the countries in the Gulf. Now, here, as many folks have pointed out, there's a reason why Iran is attacking some of these countries in the Gulf, and it's a pretty straightforward one in its assessment, and I think a correct one. These countries are obviously have been part of, as Amar was also pointing out, they have been that imperial security architecture, imperial Zionist security architecture. But as also Amar pointed out, what they have experienced over the past 1 to 2 months is the inability or the unwillingness of the empire to defend these countries, whether it be from Iran or even from Israel. We have to remember that when the negotiations were taking place on a ceasefire with the Hamas and those in Qatar. The Israelis bombed Qatar to try to take out the Hamas delegation there. So these countries, whatever in the past differences I think that they had with Iran, also understand today that the principal threat, the principal rogue nation in the region is Israel. Israel, which at times it seems like even the empire itself cannot restrain. So I think that these countries understand that. They also understand, despite their obviously public anger and protestations at the Iranian attacks on them, they understand that Iran is responding to the U.S.-Israeli aggression and to this, to that regional architecture of control that has always wanted to wipe out the supposed threat of Iran to the region, and that is the threat of Iran to imperial and Zionist hegemony in the region. So I think that they understand that very well. A majority of those countries were opposed to this war and continue to be opposed to this war and supportive of whatever peace efforts there are to stop this war. And I think that perhaps this can be said with the exception of the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, which seem to be very closely aligned with Israel. So that's the situation in the region, and I think that. This is why when Amar was pointing out how revered and how much mourned was the late Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, what pointed precisely in this direction, that it became so crystal clear that Iran was fighting the war against empire, the war against Zionism in the region. And in some ways, even these countries that seem to be so closely allied to the United States, in some ways also understood that Iran was fighting their war against Israel and Zionism. That after Iran, as you know, the Israelis actually say quite publicly at times, the next is Turkey, the next is Pakistan. Why? Because these are the regional powerhouses with formidable militaries in the region, and Zionism and Israel will never tolerate that. So even these regimes that again have had very close relationships and continue to with the United States can see the writing on the wall, that the biggest threat is not coming from Iran, it is coming from Israel, which is why they continue to speak against Israel. I mean, since the genocide, now again, the question is how much are they doing? And certainly they did not do much. I mean, it was a scandal how they sat back and were silent during the genocide in Gaza. And just the one final question is, okay, so this is as Heather Medisab was mentioning, a change in the mindset of Pakistanis from a more, colonized mentality to one that is much more, in some ways, anti-imperialist, more towards the side of liberation or revolution. So the question is that has it really changed because it has, instead of that nationalism around the army, it has now turned towards Imran Khan. And I would argue that yes, that in fact that affirms the idea that ordinary Pakistanis have moved in a very different direction. I think Heather Mehdi Sahab was spot on when he said how much what a significant decline there has been in the popularity of the Pakistani military in the country, because we have to remember that the Pakistani military always portrayed itself as the less corrupt force in the country, more honest, more meritocratic, and more disciplined than the civilian politicians. And to some extent, that may have been true. That one, or at least visibly on the surface, whenever you saw these politicians come to power, you'd see such open corruption. And this is why when you would have military coups, for example, when Musharraf came to power in 1999, no one was on the streets protesting that coup. No one was in the streets demanding, reinstall the government of Nawaz Sharif at that time. So they had largely won that narrative. That is the Pakistani military portraying itself as the more innocent actor. Of course, that narrative was never really true. The Pakistani military could just do a better job in concealing its corruption. So, but that narrative has completely collapsed. As I said, that narrative was never strong in regions of the Pashtuns or the Baloch, who had always confronted a state architecture which was quite violent towards them. But the major shift that has happened, that even within the most populous and politically powerful province of the Punjab, even within the Punjab, the popularity of the military has completely eroded. So that's an important point. And and in terms of Imran Khan, I think that this is a very important discussion. And I was half jokingly initially saying that many people who are supporters, critical supporters of Imran Khan, are often seen as being part of a cult. Now, there's no question that Imran Khan has been this charismatic figure, but what is important to highlight here is that Imran Khan has just become a symbol of resistance, right? No one is getting into the nitty gritty anymore that what was his specific policy on this question. And like Heather Mehdi Saab was saying, that many of us thought uh, he was hopelessly naive on some issues. He didn't understand. He was ill-informed on certain things. But the point is that right now he's a symbol of resistance to not just the Pakistani military, but the entrenched hierarchical social order in Pakistan. That's what he represents, right? I think it's become a futile debate to get into, oh, what was his specific policy here and there? And that didn't seem very revolutionary or progressive. That's fine. But I think that what people miss in that is the fact that Khan represents the yearnings and desires of the social majorities of Pakistan for some type of a change, for some type of challenge to the system that they've been so used to of both, as we have spoken about, military rule as well as the rule of corrupt these civilian political mafias. That is what he represents. I mean, he's been sitting in jail, languishing for the past now 2, 3 years. So it's not so much what is his daily position on this and that. It is about how he symbolizes the desire of especially young people in the country for something different. And what they see now is, in some ways, after Khan was overthrown, the restoration of the ancien regime, the restoration of those hierarchies and political and class forms of oppression in the country. So I think that that's how we have to see Khan, not get into the nitty gritty. What was his specific position here and there? What was his specific policy? I mean, I think that's important as well. But I think moving forward, it's not so much about that. It's about how the symbolism of Khan is used to move forward in the confrontation against entrenched political and social elites within the country. And with that, I will now conclude this webinar. I want to thank the panelists that, of course, joined us, but especially I want to thank the folks at Just, my dear colleagues, Khalisha and Hassanal, for organizing this. Thanks to the audience for coming, and this as just one more episode or webinar in our regime change series, which of course we're going to have many more of in the future, and we will keep you abreast of all of these webinars that we will be holding, and you will be notified hopefully from Just. So with that, I want to thank everyone for joining us for this webinar today. Take care. Have a nice day, evening, morning. Thank you very much. Take care. Bye-bye.